My name is Jerry Gill. Today is December 3rd, 2009. I'm visiting with Chris Stevens in Oklahoma City at his office. This interview is for the O State Shortage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Chris, I know you're busy today, and I appreciate you taking time to visit. It's good to see you again.
Happy to be a part. Good to see you, Jerry.
What I thought you might do, first of all, Chris, is just could we start kind of with your early life a little bit and tell us where you grew up, a little bit about your family, and you know, some of the things earlier in your life.
Sure. Well, I was born in Edmond, but my parents, who were OSU graduates, were living in Guthrie at the time, and I was born in 1975. My parents were agricultural education teachers and FFA advisors at Guthrie High School at the time, and from 75 through the mid-'80s, I lived in Guthrie. Then my parents moved to take a similar job in Chickasha. So we moved to Chickasha in the mid-'80s, and I finished high school there in 1994. I grew up in kind of a farming and ranching background. We had some cattle, and I showed cattle growing up and spent a lot of time out on the farm with that as a child. And then through high school, I tried to get a little more involved with student council and some of the National Honor Society activities, and also spent a lot of time with FFA. And one of the things I did when I got to Stillwater was my first year there, I served as a state FFA officer, which continued a lot of the things I tried to do in FFA in high school.
Well, from those experiences, FFA experiences, working with the farm, were there some life lessons that you learned there, or some things that influenced you?
I think so, and I think at least some of them were positive. My family, my parents were big believers in hard work, and we always had a lot to do around the house, and we had a lot of chores, and I think those are good things looking back. So we had a lot of early mornings and daily responsibilities taking care of the cattle, and we spent a lot of weekends and holidays out, whether it was feeding hay or taking care of the cattle to make sure the job got done. And I certainly appreciate the work ethic those types of activities taught, and think that's a great transferable skill no matter what you do.
You haul some hay there, and hay mat at the bottom.
On occasion, we did more large bales. When it would come to the small bales of hay, we did have to do a little bit of that during the summertime, and I always thought of that as some of the best motivational work possible. after trying to load those 100-pound bales of alfalfa. It makes going back to school look pretty exciting.
A great incentive, isn't it?
That's right. A good incentive to finish the degree and maybe get an office job.
Were you involved in any sports in high school or other things? You mentioned FFA and some student leadership positions. Other things you're engaged with?
I played baseball a little bit in junior high and high school in my freshman year, and then in part because I wasn't very good, and in part because I thought I could maybe do a little better with FFA and some of the scholastic activities. I didn't play sports any more than that. I did play a little bit of some of the intramurals at Oklahoma State, primarily limited to ping pong.
Well, you got to be a story there. We won't go there.
Well, I was the B League ping pong champion one year at Oklahoma State.
Oh, cool.
And then the next year I bumped up to the A League, and I made it to the quarterfinals. There were 4 of us left. I think I was the only Oklahoman left.
That's great. Super. Well, speaking of Oklahoma State University, Chris, maybe your parents' background, but the other things influenced you to enroll at Oklahoma State University?
There were. It was a combination of my parents and my grandpa had gone to school there, and I had grown up, and as I've described, was pretty involved with ag activities and FFA, and a lot of the students coming up from the small towns in Oklahoma, as you know, end up at Oklahoma State in the College of Ag. So that part was appealing to me. And then my freshman year, as part of service as an FFA officer, we did a lot of activities through the FFA, through the Career Tech Center, which was there in Stillwater. So several of those factors kind of went together to seem like Stillwater was the right place. I didn't apply to any other schools. I certainly, the thought kind of crossed my mind, but I don't have any regrets, and was happy to get to Stillwater in the fall of '94.
And now your major was Ag Econ, is that right?
That's right.
So how did you decide on Ag Econ?
Well, again, it was sort of I think kind of the natural choice for those of us growing up in in some of the rural areas. A lot of the folks I had known through FFA or through my community had studied in the College of Ag, and it didn't necessarily mean they were returning necessarily to full-time ag careers, but I'd heard that program was a great training ground for business or for law, or for people who wanted to remain involved with agriculture, maybe not full-time.
Well, maybe jumping ahead of the story a little bit, Chris, I know you later went to law school. Did you, as an undergraduate, did you intend to go to law school? Was that a goal?
It was a thought. I'm not sure it was what I had in mind necessarily. Early on, I knew I wanted to do some type of government work, and I thought maybe some type of a public administration degree or a master's degree, more related to ag, or some type of ag science might be the right thing. I had thought about law school, but frankly, I didn't have any lawyers in the family and didn't have a lot of context for what law school would be or the practice of law would be. But decided at the end of my time at Oklahoma State, and then when I was over in graduate school, that law school would be a nice next step.
Okay. Well, going back to OSU, Chris, I assume you'd been there probably several times, as you indicated, the FFA activities, 4-H activities, different things with your family, probably sporting events. But as a student, you first come on campus, what were some of your first impressions of OSU?
Well, the first impressions were very favorable to me. I had been there dozens of times growing up, and we had spent a lot of nights there in Stillwater with FFA activities or different conventions or meetings in Stillwater or livestock shows. So I was certainly familiar with the community, not necessarily with the campus. And coming from Chickasha, where we had more than 100 students in my class, but certainly not like the campus of Oklahoma State, it was, I think, for a lot of students, like it was for a lot of students, a little bit intimidating at the time, just given the size. I did join a fraternity and had the benefit of several guys in the house who were very active on campus who helped ease that transition for me. So it was certainly a transition, but I felt fortunate to have known several dozen students who were there already, and so that things went pretty well to get started.
Well, you're a very focused student, and always have been, Chris, but did you have a plan when you came to Oklahoma State, specific expectations for your undergraduate experience?
I had, I'm not sure I had specific expectations. I had come to Oklahoma State wanting to challenge myself, and I had read right around the time I got to Oklahoma State about guys who had gone on to some of these scholarships that I later applied for, like Brian Begley, who had just won a Truman Scholarship and been a finalist for a Rhodes. And I also had the benefit of getting acquainted with Wes Hawley in the College of Ag, who had known my parents when they were in school together with Wes back in Oklahoma State several years ago. And Dr. Hawley really kind of challenged me early on that, you know, if you want to do some really neat things on campus, there are lots of people who are here to help you. And if you're thinking about some of these scholarships, maybe to apply for well-known graduate schools or study overseas, you can do that. So at least I had that seed in the back of my mind. I'm not sure I had everything scripted out. I certainly can't say that, but I had an idea that I wanted to take advantage of everything I could there.
Well, sort of breaking that in two parts, maybe, Chris. First of all, the social activities, student organizations, aside from your scholar development programs, what things were you involved in? The fraternity you're in was?
Yeah, Alpha Gamma Rho.
AGR.
Alpha Gamma Rho. I was in the AGR house, and I'm trying to take a trip down memory lane. I remember, for example, as a freshman getting involved with the Agricultural Student Council as a freshman representative. I was on I'm forgetting the names. I think it was called FRC, Freshman Representative Council, within student government. I was also on the President's Leadership Council, and then tried to join a couple of other activities or groups. I was a committee member with Homecoming my freshman year, and a couple of other things. And then, that the neat part of a place like Stillwater, or I think most colleges, is in some ways there are natural progressions. Once you do certain things your freshman year, then there were different activities where you kind of needed to have some things under your belt for for your freshman year. So, I tried to get a little more involved with the Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity and a little bit more involved in the College of Ag, and then got more involved in the Alumni Association with some of the homecoming activities.
Of course, how did you first learn about the Scholar Development Program? Were you a freshman scholar in the freshman scholar program?
No, I wasn't, and I don't remember at the time, back in '94, which programs were available. I was familiar enough with the program as it existed in the mid-'90s to take Dr. Grauman's Windows to the World class as a freshman, and that was a small 1 or 2 hour elective course where we talked about current events, but it really was a segue into getting to know Bob Grauman better and trying to better understand what types of scholarships were out there. So I think that was probably the first step I took to learn more about the scholarships. And I don't recall whether it was through West Holly or upperclassmen on campus how I learned about that program, but I became involved and started to develop a relationship with Dr. Grauman and some of the opportunities through the program. And then, from there, just tried to keep in touch with him my freshman, sophomore year, and then later on as a junior and senior, certainly spent more time with the program when I was applying for the Truman and the Marshall and some of those programs.
Did you have a WINS research project?
I did not.
Did not?
No, I did not.
Interesting.
I did not, and I was involved with the Honors College, but I frankly, I don't remember even considering applying for it, and it's something looking back I probably wish I would have to develop more of a research study with a professor on campus, but I didn't do a WINS, and tried to pick up a couple of minors and do the Honors College, but that is one of the things I missed out on.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because a lot of the awardees, that won prestigious scholarships that I talked to had to go either start with the freshman scholarship
right.
or certainly had a WINS research project, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, I guess I was an exception to that rule.
Could you explain what different components you were engaged in the Scholar Development Program? Like you mentioned, Bob Grauman's, who's director of the program, he has the Windows on the World program, and then there's there's WINS program, there's the honors college program you're talking about, and then there's preparing for the scholarships. But could you kind of explain your sort of evolution, how you were engaged in?
Sure. Again, I'm testing my memory here from incredibly is 15 years now, but I got involved with Dr. Grauman's class in my freshman year, which would have been 94, 95, and then took some honors classes and kept in touch with him because by that time I became familiar with some of the students who had been applying for the Trumans and the Marshalls and the Rhodes, and didn't want to necessarily mimic what those folks had done, but wanted to be able to put myself in the best position possible. So I remember going in there on occasion to talk to him about some of those scholarships, but really it wasn't until the time I applied for the Truman Scholarship back in, I guess, the spring of '98, but I would have started applying in the fall of '97, when I kind of re-engaged with that program and spent a lot of time with Dr. Grauman and the program and kind of understanding and preparing the application materials for the Truman, and then that carried on into the next year, into '98 and '99, when I was applying for the Marshall.
Well, good. Maybe picking up on those comments, Chris, a little bit, could you talk about your participation? You were fortunate enough to be selected for the Truman Scholarship and for the Marshall Scholarship, both very prestigious national, actually international scholarships. First of all, could you describe the two scholarships briefly and how they differ,
Sure.
the Truman versus the Marshall?
Sure. The Truman Scholarship is a scholarship funded by our federal government, of course named in honor of our former president, and each year the Truman Foundation selects about 75 to 80 students from around the country who they think show some interest in public service. The idea is to follow the model of public service that President Truman set forth, and the scholarship is, it was around $30,000 back in my day. It may have increased a bit now with inflation, but it's intended for a graduate study at any university. And as part of that scholarship, you kind of explain to the committee what you have in mind and why you'd like to go to graduate school and why the scholarship will help you with that. So that's a graduate school scholarship. The Marshall Scholarship is a scholarship paid for by the British government. It's a scholarship that was meant to be a thank you to the United States for the money we invested in Europe, specifically in the United Kingdom after World War II with the Marshall Plan. So it's a scholarship where the British government, through the Marshall selection committees, find about 40 students a year from around the United States, and that money, or those scholars, are then given basically a couple years worth of scholarship money for any university in the United Kingdom. So that's not only the universities I attended, Oxford and Cambridge within England, but also occasionally a student will go to Scotland or to Wales or to Northern Ireland. So it's a scholarship paid for by the British government to study in England. So just chronologically here, I was able to do the Marshall Scholarship, then come back to law school and use the money from the Truman Scholarship to pay for a semester or two at a private law school.
Great. Well, how did your participation, Chris, in the Scholars Program, how did it prepare you for competition for the Truman and the Marshall Scholarships?
Sure. Well, the involvement through the Scholar Development Program was essential for me. I think it was kind of a but-for reason that I was able to be as lucky as I was with the scholarship program. It's and it came about in a couple of ways. I think early on, even as a freshman or sophomore, when I was describing the Windows to the World class, it's so helpful for a program to give younger students some context of what these scholarships are, and basically to make them a little more realistic. It's when I came to school and I heard about these, I thought those types of scholarships may be reserved for students at elite private schools on the East or West Coast, and it was very helpful, first of all, to know that students from Oklahoma State had won those, and then second of all, that Dr. Grauman and other faculty mentors had helped those students. So it helps on the front end just to give students a sense of what the scholarships are and that they are within reach. Later on, when you're applying for the scholarships, it's very helpful to bounce ideas off of Dr. Grauman or these other faculty mentors maybe within your college. And the Scholar Development Program was particularly useful in providing some input and comments on the application materials and the essays, and in coordinating those application materials. And then also once you apply and you're able to make it to an interview round, to prepare practice interviews and help to give you a sense of what you might expect with those interviews. You've got to get through the door first of all with your application, but at least with the Truman and the Marshall, there's an interview involved too. And again, that can be a mysterious process if you've not spoken with anyone who's been through there. So Dr. Grauman helped me, and I know he does still, to organize several practice interviews for students who are getting ready.
And Chris, some context around that application. You mentioned that word essay. Some of them have an application are thinking maybe a 2-3 page form you fill out. That's not the kind of application you're talking about, is it?
No, and again, I'm trying to go back to what the application involved. I know for the Truman, because it is geared more to government service, you're basically asked to provide a policy statement on some area of government policy you might propose to be changed, or some area that you'd like to study. So a good part of that essay or a good part of that application is involved with a fairly detailed policy statement on this area where you have some focus. And then you also have some other shorter essay questions. I know for the Marshall at the time when I applied, there was also a personal statement involved, which was relatively short, but because it played such an important role, even though it was only maybe a few pages, it really took a lot of planning and brainstorming with Dr. Grauman and others identify kind of how you wanted to portray yourself, or how you wanted to construct that personal statement.
And the mock interviews you're talking about, I understand those could be pretty brutal sometimes when they come
Well,
back. The professors, I think, they're at OSU to help work on those. Could you kind of explain that?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. I think the idea would be that you go through the practice interviews, and your actual interview is in fact easier than what you've come to expect from the practice interviews. I think that, of course we can't predict with any certainty what the questions will be from the committee, but what we can do is try to simulate that environment. And sometimes that means being fairly rude during the interview, or cutting the interviewee off, or maybe challenging the student on issues the student's raised, or maybe posing contrary views and seeing how the student responds, or maybe posing a fairly esoteric question that you probably realize that the student wouldn't know, but just seeing how the student responds when confronted with kind of that awkward question that you don't know the answer to. So I think the idea there is to give the student some sense of what it's like to be in front of a handful of professional strangers who may try to do their best to make you feel silly, or to challenge you, or to challenge your beliefs. So it's a very helpful, and I think the more times you go through that, the more comfortable you feel when you go up to the actual committee interview.
It's rumored that Bob Spurrier was pretty tough on those.
He was, and I don't remember if he had been on one of my practice interviews, but I do think some of the folks on campus would take some pleasure from the interviews, because
Chris, typically, how many mock interviews would you do?
Gosh, again, I'd like to think at least one or two for each of the scholarships, and those would be in front of Dr. Grauman and faculty members on campus, or maybe students who had been through the scholarship before. So, at least, and I know just from email correspondence this year for some of the students, Dr. Grauman would try to coordinate at least a couple of interviews for each student who was getting ready to interview, to give them some sense from two different panels of what types of questions could be expected.
Could you imagine going through this process, I mean, as an applicant, without having had that preparation background in the Scholar Development Program?
It would be, I think the short answer would probably be no. It would be very difficult and pretty frightening to take a stab at that alone. So, I think the program is extraordinarily helpful to help students feel more comfortable, and to let them know about these opportunities, and help to prepare them.
Chris, could you take us through just sort of personal perspective, if you can recall back your feelings going through the process for the Truman, and then for the Marshall, and kind of process. So process was, if I understand, the Truman, you had to be selected amongst other students from Oklahoma State.
That's right.
Two or so, or two or three would go forward. So you'd have to go through that. But could you take through the process and kind of what you remember, sort of your personal perspective about it?
Sure. I remember, with each step, and maybe it's because of kind of a smaller town ag background, or I think a lot of it is just the modesty that a lot of us have at Oklahoma State. I was pleasantly surprised with each step. The Truman was certainly a scholarship that I was interested in. I applied as one of the school candidates, and as you described, 2 or 3 would be selected to move on for national consideration. I applied and went through that initial round of interviews, and felt good to be selected as one of our university candidates. Then I think there was some level of self-doubt or skepticism whenever I was going up to interview against students who were from around the country and came from private schools around the country for the Truman selection. And when I thought the interview with the Truman went reasonably well, but I didn't come out of there feeling like I had done the best interview I'd ever done, and then was just surprised and shocked to be chosen for a Truman back in 1998. And at that point, I had developed a little more confidence, but I thought, I'm interested in graduate school. A lot of the Trumans from my year were applying for the Marshall and the Rhodes scholarships, and I thought, I have nothing to lose. I looked at both of the applications and decided the Marshall was a little bit better fit for me, just given a program or two that I learned about at Cambridge, and again interviewed and was surprised and pleased to be moved to advance as one of our university candidates. With the Marshall interview, it was in Houston on a cold day, and I guess back in late 1998, and I thought that interview actually went fairly poorly, and I was quite confident that I had not won a scholarship, and was preparing to take a job and kind of move on and then come back to graduate school maybe in another year or two, and then was frankly shocked when I found out in late November or early December of '98 that I had been chosen to go to England the next fall. And so, with each step, it was incredibly humbling, but also a confidence builder in a strange way too. At the same time, just to be recognized on a personal level, but also for the university to be recognized, and for us to confirm that we can compete with any of these universities around the country.
Chris, so in each one of those scholarships, you had just one round of interviews that you actually just went right to the national selection level. How many people would typically come in for an interview?
Well, at least when I was involved with the Truman Scholarship, you would apply based on your state, either the state where you were in school or the state where you were from. And as an Oklahoma candidate, there was another young lady chosen that year with me from Oklahoma. We had regional interviews down in Dallas, Fort Worth, for Texas, Oklahoma, maybe another state or two. And I don't recall, I think roughly, if I remember my numbers right, for every Truman that's named, they probably interview 2 to maybe a couple more or so. So there may have been 4, 5, 6 people from Oklahoma being interviewed for Truman. The committee at the same time would be interviewing students from Texas and maybe Louisiana or another adjacent state. So
it was a regional competition. It was selected from a region.
That's right. It was regionally, but at the same time, there's really just a cap nationwide. So with the Truman, for example, there's no, at least as I remember it at the time, there was no minimum requirement that Oklahoma had to have a Truman Scholar that year. Our year there were 2. Some years there aren't any from Oklahoma. So it just depends. It's not necessarily allocated by state. For the Marshall, it was again done on a regional basis in Texas, with Oklahoma, Texas, and one or two other adjacent states. And it's my understanding that the regional committee would somehow prioritize or select a group of students that would be submitted to the national committee. They would take as many as the national committee thought appropriate. So I think there was in some way some guarantee of a certain number of students coming from the Houston, Texas region, but I think there is a little bit of flexibility as to how many come from a particular region each year.
Chris, did you know, for example, on the Truman or both of them on the regional scholarships after you interviewed, did you know at the end of the interview whether you'd been accepted or not?
No.
Didn't know?
No, it was quite some time. I don't recall with the Truman it was at least a couple of weeks, because as you can imagine, there were several, more than a dozen regional committees meeting around the country. Then the scholars are announced at once. So those committees would often meet over a 2 to 3 week period, and then at the end, the Truman Foundation would announce the scholars at one time. With the Marshall, it was at least a couple of weeks. So no, you don't. You have to agonize for a while.
Sweat it out.
That's right.
That's great. How did Chris? I mean, obviously you were very successful in the competition. How did your participation in the scholar program impact you personally and help you develop as a student and as an individual?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the scholarship program and the application for some of these scholarships are helpful regardless of the results, and I don't mean to be disingenuous saying that because I was lucky enough to win, but in any event, developing the personal statement that I was talking about earlier, or trying to formulate the graduate school plans, those are good things that carry over into any type of graduate school application. I think the interviews, the practice interviews for the scholarships are a good thing that help you to think on your feet and are very transferable to whatever you want to do. I also think the process itself, just causing you to think about what you want to do in the short term and a few years down the road and long term, are good things too for your own self-reflection and planning. So, I was lucky enough to come out with a couple of the scholarships, but I know a lot of students, regardless of the results, benefit from the program.
Well, Chris, just kind of follow up on that. What do you say to a student who competed, maybe was selected from Oklahoma State, got the regional competition, didn't make it, maybe for a couple of scholarships that were unsuccessful? Was it still good for them, or what would you say?
Well, I hope it was, and I've certainly realized from meeting students who won the scholarships, and then from going to graduate school to speak with students who had applied and maybe not won some of them. Frankly, to some extent, the scholarship process at the national level is a bit of a crapshoot, and it's impossible to be objective. As you can imagine, students coming in with a whole spectrum of interest and backgrounds, and it's tough to say, two people would have very grounded and reasonable beliefs to think that an Ag Econ student with my background should get it instead of a liberal arts or humanities major from a private school, and that the other person on that committee may have strong thoughts for the other person. So because it's so subjective and in a way arbitrary, depending on, frankly, whether your interest in gel or match up in some way with the interest or the dynamics of the committee members, it's impossible to predict. And I try to tell students at that level, there's just a certain element of chance and of luck. The best we can do is help you to feel prepared going in there, that you've done everything you can do at the time to be ready for the interview. And beyond that, it's up to the committee, and sometimes it's hard to explain.
It's kind of what you said, Chris, maybe taking your words. You're saying the process that you go through helps you focus kind of your life, short-term, longer-term goals, a little bit about what your priorities were in life.
Sure.
So a person who, even if they didn't get a scholarship, they would go through the same process, and it would shape them as well.
I would hope so. And like I said earlier, just on a practical level, some of the application materials, like the personal statement, can be useful for graduate schools, regardless of how the scholarship turns out. And then I think the self-reflection and the writing skills you develop through the program are transferable skills that will stay with you regardless of whether you're in England at the time or back here on one of the scholarships. I think they're all you're going to learn something from it, and I hope it's a positive experience for the students. I think it almost in every occasion is, because you develop some of these interview skills and writing skills that are good.
Well, Chris, you've touched on some of these. Let me kind of wrap it up maybe with this question. What do you think should be the goals of the Scholar Development Program? What should be the desired outcomes for the program from your perspective as a successful participant?
I think of it, a couple of the goals that come to my mind from the beginning are first of all, to help inform our students about these opportunities, and to let them know that students in very similar backgrounds to them have been competitive and have won at national and international levels with these scholarships. I think part of it is I talked about the modesty of our students earlier, but at least that for myself as a smaller town student in the College of Ag, I needed someone to plant a seed or to believe in me a little bit that I could achieve at that level. So I think one goal that I have for the program is to help those students look a little differently at themselves in the mirror, to help them to realize that they can apply and be competitive. And then I think on the back end, when the students are actually going through the process, I think the program is set up, and I think one of the goals certainly should be to help these students develop what I keep saying are the transferable skills, the writing skills with your essays or personal statements for graduate school, and the interview skills to be able to think on your feet and respond to hostile questions and contrary arguments. Those types of things seem important to me and seem to be skills that last well beyond what you do at Oklahoma State.
And as you said earlier, maybe also just how they look at life and themselves.
That's right.
And their priorities going down the road.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, what have been the strengths and successes of the Scholar Program through the years? You probably looked at it as a participant, and I'm sure Bob's engaged you in help with students in years past.
Sure.
Coming back. What do you think have been the strengths and weaknesses of the program?
Well, I think I think one of the strengths has to be Bob Grauman himself, who's been involved with the program now and has developed such an understanding of the scholarship programs and the opportunities available that he's just a great resource for students who are coming in and interested in graduate school or international study. So I think when you talk about the good things of the program, I think that's one of the areas where you start. I also think the program has built up momentum where a real strength now is the number of faculty mentors we have, and not just mentors who are willing to help out when the student's getting ready for interview, but faculty who are willing and excited to find students when they're graduating high school, seniors coming into the college, or freshmen there on campus who have what they think are the talent and the ability to succeed at the higher level, and to be able to challenge them and encourage them to go talk to Dr. Grauman or others maybe in their college about some of these other opportunities. So I think the program's developed enough momentum where we have satellite posts in the different schools who are helping to identify the students who may be able to succeed with some of these and be able to funnel them in through Dr. Grauman and to at least be aware of some of the scholarships. So I think those are a couple of the real strengths I see in the program.
Chris, do you feel like that just through some of the buzz that's created about it, does it help recruit or attract some academically gifted students to Oklahoma State?
I think it does, and I think I think it certainly helps for the small subset of students who have maybe some of these scholarships on their mind as a high school senior, and I said earlier, maybe through Dr. Hawley I did, but I wasn't aware of much really. But I think for a certain number of students who think they may be certainly interested in graduate school, maybe interested in one of these scholarships, I think it's a great sign to these students that OSU, first of all, has a track record through the program of producing students who are capable and succeeding with these programs, but also that there's some type of institutional program or structure where these students don't have to fight the battle themselves, where there are resources and folks available both in your college and through Dr. Grauman and the Office of Scholar Development who can help you prepare as well as you could prepare at any other school to be competitive for these scholarships.
Who were some other students that were successful in the program when you were going through?
When I was there on campus, Shannon Farrell and Blaine Grudeman were both in the program. Shannon won a Truman, and Blaine won a Rhodes while I was on campus. They were either a year ahead of me or right there at the same time. And then, fortunately we had a pretty good streak with the Trumans for several years there. So, those students kind of came to my mind first with folks who had won some of the national scholarships, but I know there are others who are winning, some of the Udalls and some of the others. I just didn't get to know them as well on campus.
Sometimes success creates its own problems in the sense that many universities have developed a program similar to Oklahoma State universities now because we've been so successful, kind of modeled some of their programs after our scholar development programs. And so it's always been pretty tough competition. It's become pretty fierce competition nationally for these scholarships. What changes do you think OSU will need to make, Chris, in the future? And what components will need to be enhanced to remain competitive?
Well, I don't think there is one prescription to be or remain competitive. I think we are. At least I sometimes sense from the momentum and the buzz that the scholarship programs develop that I think it's easy to have some type of expectation each year that we'll have another Rhodes Scholar or another Truman Scholar or something like that. And I think even with the very best preparation, and I think Dr. Grauman and his colleagues on campus prepare students as well as anywhere in the country. To get back to my earlier comments that it's a fairly arbitrary process at the national level. Some years, even with the best of intentions, for whatever reason, a student won't be selected. So I think moving on, the only thing we can do is continue to ensure that the students have the very best awareness and mentoring that they can have. I think I think one of those tools may be for some type of more permanent assurance of funding through Grauman's office, with some type of an endowment or money set aside to continue that program after he leaves campus, because the program, at least as I've been involved with in the past 10 years, really started from Dr. Grauman's growth and when he was back in the Office of Scholarships, and there are certainly a lot of faculty mentors now, but I think you can say safely is a point person for these. So I want to be sure the funding and the momentum are in place so that one of these days, the transition will be smooth whenever he decides to end what's been a great career there at Oklahoma State.
Before we leave Oklahoma State, just ask any favorite memories, any highlights for you? I mean, aside from, of course, you're winning scholarships, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Special memories of your times at OSU.
Yeah, well, I think I had a lot of great memories from, I'm trying to think back of some of our athletic teams, and I was there on campus when Big Country and the team came back from Seattle after they had won in the Elite Eight to qualify for the Final Four, and I was in Gallagher-Iba. When was that? 95 or so.
95.
When students and the community welcomed the team back at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, when they had just flown back in from Seattle, and people were floating kegs out to Theta Pond and throwing toilet paper all around campus over there on the south side. Those are some of the neat athletic memories from a lot of good games in Gallagher-Iba. A lot of good games there when Coach Simmons was around with the football team, and then just a lot of great memories from friends on campus, developing new friends, and like a lot of folks there, I met my wife on campus, and so Amy and I have a lot of fondness for Oklahoma State, and try to get back as much as we can.
Is your story there? How you met Amy?
We met through mutual friends.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean she takes pride in saying she's the one who asked me out first to one of these sorority day parties, but we met through mutual friends, and eventually started dating around homecoming back in '97. It's hard to believe now. It's been a long time.
Been a while. You're getting to be an old guy. Well, take kind of fast forwarding a little bit, Chris. After graduating from OSU in what, December '98, I think.
Yeah, I finished my undergrad at that time. Just a few weeks before that, I had gotten word that I had received the Marshall Scholarship. So I knew with that Marshall, I'd be going overseas in September of the next year. So instead of trying to find a job for about 8 or 9 months there, I just stayed on campus and took some graduate courses, and then actually finished coursework in May of '99.
And then can you share some highlights of your graduate experiences? Because you were, I guess, there at Cambridge and then at Oxford as well.
That's right. I was at Cambridge from the fall of '99 through 2000, and the next year I was at Oxford. And you know, there are those places have so much history and the programs I was in were at Cambridge, a land economy program, which was closer to what I'd done in ag economics. Then at Oxford, I was enrolled in a program called comparative social policy. So the programs were rather different. The first program was one that was more closely related, and I studied a lot harder and traveled less. And then the second year, by that time, Amy and I got married and had the opportunity with that program to get out and travel quite a bit more. So I have the programs are so different in the sense I was in different cities. In the second year, Amy was there, and we traveled quite a bit more, doing backpacking around Europe. So I have a lot of good memories and met a lot of neat people through both of the schools, and I'd love to get back one of these days to visit campus.
Your wildest dreams, Chris? Did a boy from Guthrie and Chickasha, Oklahoma ever think you'd be at Oxford and Cambridge universities?
No. It's pretty overwhelming still to think about it.
Just briefly, what was in your mind kind of the major difference between the two schools? Just the experience part of it, not your graduate education, but just
At the time, this was about 10 years ago now, but at the time, this is before the Gates Scholarship has started now, which brings a lot more American and international students to Cambridge. At the time, there really weren't many Cambridge students from the U.S., so I was in a college called St. John's, and there were several hundred of us in the college, but really only a handful of people from the States. So, I was an international student, and Cambridge is probably the more rural, and I would kind of think of it as more of the Oklahoma State versus Oxford, and more of the bigger city with OU. And I think it's the prettier of the two schools. At Oxford, at the time, there were many more American students, and you felt like it was a bigger city, just in terms of the size of the community. So it was easier to live a graduate school life like you would have here, in a way, in the States. So, and by that time, Amy had come over and we were married, and I spent a fair amount of time with some of the other American students. But it was different in terms of the student population and the influence of the States. You're really kind of out on your own there at Cambridge versus a more American version at Oxford.
So, I mean, that's prestigious enough. We get to Cambridge and Oxford, and then you go to law school at Yale.
That's right.
And so, at what point we had this conversation earlier in the interview, but at what point did you decide for sure you wanted to go to law school and apply it at Yale?
Yeah, I think it was at the end of Oklahoma State and getting overseas, where I was trying to think about the next step, and I had in mind some type of graduate school. But earlier I thought if I don't win a fellowship to go overseas, I may work a year or two and then go to graduate school. But around the time I got over to England, I started thinking more seriously and talking to other students who were over there about law school, and decided to take the exam for law school, and I actually applied to law school from Oxford when I was living there.
Pretty exciting.
It was. It was exciting, and again, it was a humbling experience in the sense that I thought, why not at least try applying to schools like a Yale or a Harvard, and if that doesn't work, I'm just fine to come back to a school here in the Midwest. But I was lucky enough to get in, and I enjoyed it.
What, kind of looking down the road a little, where do you think your legal career will take you? Well, first of all, maybe you ought to say, where's your legal career taking you to this point after you?
Yeah. After, when I graduated in 2004, I worked 2 years as a law clerk to Judge Robert Henry. He's a judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. He's a federal judge. After I worked as a law clerk for him, I went to a local law firm here in Oklahoma City. It's called Crow and Dunlevy. I was there not quite 2 years, and then came to my current job in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Oklahoma City. So now my official title is Assistant U.S. Attorney. I'm a federal prosecutor for federal criminal offenses. Right now, more violent offenses, guns and drugs and bank robberies.
Did you think you'd be that
No,
part of the legal profession?
It's been another surprise.
That's great. Are you enjoying it?
I am.
I guess maybe enjoying is not the right word, but are you?
Well,
it's challenging.
It is, and it's a rewarding type of a job where I feel good about being able to represent the United States and try to fight for justice.
Sort of back to the other question that nearly got out of sequence there, but where do you think your legal career will take you, or do you intend to stay in the legal profession for your career?
I'd like to, at least here in the short term. I've got to do something to help get the student loans paid off from law school. So I certainly plan to stay here for several years if they decide to keep me around. I'm enjoying the legal practice at this point. With the law degree, fortunately, you're able to go several different ways. I'd like to stay involved with government for a little while. So, at least for now, I don't have any plans. I don't have any plans to do anything else.
How has, we've had some conversation around this, maybe ask it a little bit different way. How has participation in the Scholars Program and the Truman and Marshall competitions, how did it impact and influence the direction of your life?
Well, it changed it a lot. I said earlier it helps you to look in the mirror a little differently. I think for me it allowed me to do things that I frankly didn't think were possible coming to Oklahoma State. And when I say that, I mean the chance to study overseas or the chance to go to a law school at a place like Yale. It gave me the confidence and helped to equip me with the tools to apply for those scholarships and to put yourself in a position to be competitive. And then, I think that's all you can ask. And it really changed. It changed the outlook that I had in terms of what was available to me with graduate school study. And it allowed me to do things I never thought a guy from Chickasha would do.
When you're down the Washita River bottom hauling hay, you didn't ever think
That's
you'd
right.
be in Cambridge, right?
That's right.
Great. Well, looking down the road, Chris, you've had significant goals in your life and have achieved several of those. But what do you hope to accomplish, and what do you hope to contribute to society in your life? Have you had a chance to think about that much? I know you're still young in your career, but
I'm older than I look. Like I said earlier, I'd like to certainly stay here for a few years. I'm enjoying the experience I'm getting. Down the road, I don't know what's in store for me. I probably do. I mean, I plan to stay involved with the practice of law for some time. Some folks who have been in these types of jobs have returned to the private sector for some point and then maybe return to the office, or some people leave to go to work at the courthouse as a judge or something like that. And those things aren't easy to predict, particularly opportunities like the judge positions. But I guess I've always had the idea, and it started well before the Truman, to try to be involved with the community. And I don't mean to sound cheesy, but something that's related to public service, that's always been important to me. So I plan to stick around Oklahoma. I don't have any interest or plans to leave at this point, and I keep looking for jobs that will allow me to try to give back and help make the world a little better place. And for now, this is a job that challenges me and helps me to feel good about it. So, we'll see. You'll have to come back in 5 or 10 years, I guess.
Well, Chris, you've again accomplished a lot for a person of your age in life, but how do you, looking back in your life now, or whatever 20 years down the road, how do you hope people remember Chris Stevens? How do you want to be remembered?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd hope to be remembered still as that hayseed from Chickasha who had the good fortune of getting some of these nice awards, but didn't change as a person and remained the same person who hopefully would be described as fairly humble and kind and genuine, despite the nice resume or the degrees or whatever else. I'd hope to be considered a good friend and a trusted friend and someone who people can count on and be proud of to represent them in the type of job I do now, or to represent them with what I did at Oklahoma State. I just hope to be that same type of person I was before I got to Stillwater.
Do you anticipate continuing your ongoing relationship with Oklahoma State University?
Well, I hope so. I don't have much money to offer at this point, but I try to help in other ways. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's certainly a place that has a lot of fondness in my heart and my family, and I try to get back there as much as we can.
Chris, is there anything kind of closing question that you'd like to discuss or bring up or talk about that we hadn't included in our conversation?
I don't think so. I really applaud this type of program to be able to document this, and I have a lot of fondness in my heart for OSU because the school's been very good for me, and I have a lot of appreciation for that, for students and faculty who helped me there at school. And I owe all the credit for anything I've been able to do with any of the scholarships and a good part of my professional career to the start there that I got at Oklahoma State. So I'll always be appreciative of that, and want to do my small part down the road to return a favor.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thank
Sure.
you very much.